Hello everyone.
Hello.
My name is Chelsea Mitchell. For those of you who don't know me, I am the director of the Woolworth Library, which is the adjacent building that you walked by on your way in tonight. Thanks for joining us. I've had the pleasure of working alongside our speaker this evening, Matt Binkowski, for the past 2 years on the American Battlefield Protection Program, which was funded through the National Park Service. In addition to being a volunteer and avid researcher for our organization, Matt is a history teacher at the Stonington High School, and he recently wrote a chapter in the upcoming book, The Presidents, 250 Years of American Political Leadership, which will be released this November. So before we welcome Matt to the podium, I just wanted to mention a few things. On the back 2 tables in the dining room, I have put out some small artifacts from the Battle of Stonington, including a Congreve rocket and 2 sized cannonballs. Feel free to have a look at those at the end of the program this evening. I would also encourage you to go down to the Lighthouse Museum. There's a larger exhibit down there, which kind of tells a more complete story. And if you are a Stonington resident, it's free to enter our museums this summer, so I encourage you to go and take advantage of that. I would also like to mention, as you exit this evening, there is a donation box on the right-hand side of the door. I would encourage you, if you are able, to make a small donation to the Historical Society. As a nonprofit, all of your dollars go towards advancing our mission of preserving, interpreting, and celebrating the history of our town. And in addition, I would also encourage you, if you are so inclined, to join as a member of our organization. You get free admission to our museums, you get discounts in the gift shop, you get invited to members-only events, one of which is coming up next Friday night, which I will be running in the library. It's called From the Vault, and we will be exploring the family albums in our collection. It's a Please Touch event, so I will give you gloves and turn you loose. So if you have any questions about that, you can reach out to me or call the Historical Society, right? So with that, thank you all again for joining us tonight, and let's welcome Matt to the podium.
Thank you, Chelsea. Nathaniel Palmer was nice enough to install Wi-Fi in the building, but not central air, so I hope we're going to survive this night unscathed. I wanted to start this. I received some saddened news last night over Facebook that Joe Ciriello had passed away. He was my high school basketball coach at Stonington, and he was a teacher and a coach, and I think above that, a leader and a mentor. So before we begin here, I thought it would be appropriate to have a brief moment of silence for Joe. He often in basketball had us run suicides during practice, and he made us go from end line to end line, and we had to do it in 24 seconds. So I thought that would be an appropriate number for a moment of silence. So this sprint's for you. Okay, so to start here, I thought I would start with the recognitions for those that worked on this program over the past several years. So firstly, I wanted to recognize Glenn Gordonier, Tertius Decay, and Liz Wood, Beth Moore for their historical expertise in helping out with the Battlefield project. I wanted to recognize Kevin McBride and the University of Connecticut for their terrestrial archaeological work and the terrestrial archaeological reports that they wrote up for our Battlefield grant to propose to the National Park Service. I also want to recognize Dave Robinson, the University of Rhode Island, Brennan Phillips, and the crew of the Shenna Rose for their side scan sonar work and the marine archaeological reports that they put together. I want to recognize Charlie Buffum, who's here today, his friend Tom Mitchell, who graciously went out with us diving. I want to recognize Bob Reiger, who couldn't be here tonight. He's on vacation, but he was the head of the project, and we had exchanged countless emails over the past 2 years, and really without him, this project wouldn't have been as organized as it would be. Clearly, I want to recognize Chelsea Mitchell for her work and her logistics behind the scenes, making sure all this stuff ran smoothly as well. Lastly, my family. They're probably sick of hearing about the War of 1812, and by proxy, I want to recognize the rest of the families of everyone that was also working on the project. All right, so speaking of family, I'm the oldest of 3 siblings. My brother and my sister are a few years younger than me. I'm very proud of what they've accomplished in their young lives. But when my sister was 5 or 6 years old, she ran away from home with nothing but a banana. She, for whatever reason, thought it was, whatever disagreement or whatever thing she didn't get, she thought it was worth, grabbing her provisions from the kitchen and running off to the top of the driveway. And there she sat and she sulked for however long, and I clearly don't remember what it was really about, but I know that she was upset. And when I think about my own children, and how young they are, we often have to remember as adults that we have all these big adult problems. And the little people, they have their problems too, and they may not seem that important to us, but to them, it means everything. And this is analogous a lot to 1812 in America, surrounding the years before this particular war, because America is upset. But to Great Britain, to the rest of the countries in Europe, I mean, we're a little baby, and we don't have the adult problems that they do. I mean, Napoleon at the time is trying to conquer the known world. I mean, he's had his first through 5th coalitions at this point. He has, gone through Austria. Hundreds of thousands of men have been killed in these wars, and Great Britain is trying to finance anyone who would face him. Meanwhile, we're over across the ocean, and if you think about it, declared our independence. We didn't get it yet. We declared our independence in '76, right? We got the Revolutionary War. We had to fight in order to get this independence. Battle of Yorktown, 1781, 1783, September 2nd, the Treaty of Paris got our independence. And then what? We have a government that doesn't really work. We have these Articles of Confederation that aren't really holding our country together. We almost had another revolution in Boston with Shays' Rebellion, and then we had to rework our government with the Continental Congress in '87, and we really didn't have what we know as our Constitution, and even our first president. Constitution's ratified in '89. I mean, if you look at 1789 to 1812, I mean, our country, by modern standards, is barely old enough to drink. We are infantile compared to the centuries-old countries that are over in Europe. So, Great Britain and France, I mean, they look at our little grievances. Oh, you're oppressing our sailors at sea. Oh, we're selling weapons and arms to Indians on the frontier. Meanwhile, 1812, I mean, you ask anybody in Europe, even today, what happened in 1812? Did they mention the War of 1812, the Second American Revolution? No. Napoleon's march on Moscow is what they remember. 600,000 troops marching across Russia. Brutal summer, they get there, the slash and burn tactics of the Russians left that army with nothing to eat, and in 5 weeks, they have to turn around and go back. They lose 500,000 of their 600,000 troops. And you don't invade Russia in winter. I mean, that's where that comes from, right? And then, if you ask them again, well, what else? Tchaikovsky's Overture of 1812. That comes from the defeat of Napoleon and celebration of kicking them out of Moscow. They're not going to tell you Charles Dickens was born in 1812 or Sacagawea died in 1812. They're not going to tell you that. They're not going to tell you about the American War of 1812. And then you ask any historian in America about the War of 1812, and you say, well, when did Battle of Stonington happen? I mean, it's a footnote. It's a sentence in transition to get to what the Battle of Bladensburg and then the Battle of Baltimore, the Francis Scott Key and the Star Spangled Banner, Rocco's Red Glare, and then we get to the burning of Washington, D.C. So our battle, what we're talking about today, is a footnote upon a footnote in world history, right? So why talk about it? Why are we here to discuss this little event? Well, for one, it's our town, gosh darn it, right? And we want to know about it. It happened, it was here. But I think, secondly, things that are most often forgotten tend to lead us to things most likely to be rediscovered. And there's a lot of stuff that, is still out there that we don't know about the battle, that the little nuances that continually to pick and add to the story and the history behind it. And it's fun, and I love it. So I want to talk to you guys a little bit about what we discovered, a little bit about the Battle of Stonington. I know many of you in this room know what happened at the Battle of Stonington, but I'm sure there are some that don't. So I have a few things I want to really talk about first before I get into the nitty-gritty of the little things that we found and that kind of stuff. So just to place it in history, War of 1812, James Madison declares war June 17th, or gives his war speech. We have the start of the war, technically June 18th, 1812, goes to the Treaty of Ghent, that was signed actually December 24th, 1814, in Ghent, Belgium. We actually had the Battle of New Orleans after the peace treaty was signed. It doesn't get really ratified through Congress, February 12, 1815. Our Battle of Stonington is from August 9th to August 12, 1814. So it's in the latter part of this war. So our committee here was trying to figure out, well, what is there for us to find? What is there for us to look at? We were sitting there at a meeting one day a few years ago, trying to figure out, well, really, where do we start with this? And our starting point, we decided, was going to be Tertius Decay's book. Tertius did an absolutely amazing job culminating the works of some of the captain's letters and a lot of the stuff from around here, the local history of the American side of this conflict, into this book, and he tells a very nice tale of how the battle happened. But in Tertius' defense, I mean, he was just a little boy when the Battle of Stonington took place. Right? So he doesn't remember everything. But kidding aside, he did this book before the internet age, really. I mean, I think the book was published in 1990, all his research in the 1980s. He was looking at some work by, it was Frank Lynch, who was helping him research some of this stuff. But he had some files of some of the battle from overseas accounts, but he covered most of the stuff around here perfectly. But it's the overseas stuff, because the internet age, I mean, really, it's amazing what is out there and what is accessible now that we have online databases you can look at. I mean, I've combed through the National Archives of Great Britain, the National Maritime Museum overseas, the whole History Center in Scotland. You can get onto the New York Public Library or the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and you can browse all of their online files. You then, of course, you have to pay for anything you want copies of, and overseas, you got to pay to even see it, because some of this stuff is locked away in some drawer somewhere that they got to, pay someone to go and find and copy for you. But nevertheless, it's there. So this process of 2 years, and I really mean 2 years of research, it took a while, because you ask for this, and then you get this 3 weeks later, and then you look at it, and you're like, okay, well, that didn't really tell me anything. What do I look at next? And then you got another 2 or 3 weeks. So this was an ongoing process. But it took a long time to process the data from the side scan sonar and magnetometer stuff too. So this was slow. The research was slow if you just can't go over to Great Britain and do it. But we were able to add several things to Tertius's book, and that was our point. Tertius, we all decided we're going to read Tertius's book. He got his 35-cent royalties from all of us reading it, and then we go and we say, okay, what can we expand upon? So here's some of the things I want to discuss tonight. I think first and foremost, and this is kind of one of the things I wanted to discover when I first started looking at this project, is why were we attacked in the first place? What prompted the attack on Stonington? So I want to go into 10 minutes or so and just talk about that, because I think it's pertinent to this discussion. Even we may go find a cannonball, but what's the point if we don't understand why it was fired? So we're going to talk about that. When did the British Navy arrive? Where were the exact locations of these ships? This is stuff without having the British logs, without having the captain's letters, the correspondence. We couldn't really piece together before, and we were able to get a lot of that stuff. So where were they? What do they tell us? What's lost at the Battle of Stonington? Is it worth, we have $52,000, okay. Believe it or not, that doesn't stretch very far. What do we do with it? Do we even pay someone to do the side scan sonar, the magnetometer, knowing it's going to cost thousands of dollars if there's nothing to go look for? So let's make a list. What is the stuff we had to locate? Is there still things to find? Was there a successful British landing of troops? We have corroborating stories from different people. The British say basically nothing on the subject because they were failed landing attempts. They will tell you that the boats disembarked at one point, but they don't give you much more information than that because they don't want to anger their superiors usually. But in America, we have like the Amos Palmer account, which talks about bodies cartwheeling through the air and boats being blown up, and he has his point of view and audience that he's trying to get money for. He wrote a letter to the Secretary of State trying to get funding to give to the troops as like a good job payment. So he patriotically glorified, I think, some of the findings. So there's a little bit discrepancy there. Where exactly should we have the Marine Archaeology Survey? What does it look like? How did it go? What did we find? Where do we go from there? And then I have a few interesting facts that we found along the way that if we get to, I will tell you about because they're kind of interesting. All right, so why was Stonington attacked? Tertius will tell you in his book, it was an unprovoked attack. It was a surprise attack. The British thought we were manufacturing torpedoes in Stonington. Of course, I think the word he used was, there wasn't a scintilla of evidence to say that we had any torpedoes. So why was the Battle of Stonington happening? It's like, we're not sure. In looking at all this stuff, I kind of have a hypothesis. You can take it for what it is, but this is why I think the Battle of Stonington occurred. So I want to show you guys some images. Think of what type of feelings these images bring in your mind. Think of an adjective, think of a feeling. We have this one. IEDs, roadside bombs, war on terror. We have this one. Vietnam War, 1954 to 1975. We have booby traps, bungee sticks, cartridge traps. This one, World War I, sinking of the Lusitania, sinking of tons and tons of merchant vessels by German U-boats, civilians being sunk. You probably are thinking in your mind, well, this is awful. Brutal tactics. Putting this, on the side of the road to blow up a Humvee. Terrible. Cowardice attempts to attack the enemy. Really, what all of these images have in common is that they are tactics of war used by an enemy that is trying to kill a superior fighting force. Now, if I ask you about this image, Lexington and Concord, the shot heard round the world. We used guerrilla-style warfare in the beginnings of the Revolutionary War, to fight against a superior fighting force. But your adjectives in your mind might be a little bit different, right? They might tell you, oh, well, this is what strategy they used back then. Man, they really showed those British, you know. But the British, what would they tell you? Probably the same thing from these three images about us. You know, these colonists don't fight like gentlemen, right? They're not out in the fields, you know, facing us man to man. They're hiding behind bushes. Now, in the lead up to the War of 1812 and us declaring war, the United States was insanely ill-prepared. I mean, we had 6 frigates for our Navy. And that was created by George Washington with the Navy Act, the Naval Act of 1794, right? I mean, we got what the President, the Congress, the Constitution, the Constellation, the all the Ironsides there, the Constitution. These boats are great. They're heavy frigates, but that's all we have, right? Our army is not existent. You know, James Madison, President of the United States, leading up to this battle, or this war, he is adamant on several principles. He is principled in, I mean, he wrote the Constitution, so he believes the Constitution will conquer all. He is in favor of democracy and the people. And what he didn't want was our country turning into the monarchies and the despots of Europe. And what do they all have in common? They all have large militaries and armies. So if we are to take a new approach and have a government for the people, by the people, we can't have a big standing military force that can take over, that can, you know, lead a despot like Napoleon across the fields of Europe. So we don't do anything. We have stinking 6 frigates and militia. But we declare war anyway because we are mad, right? So we go to war with our banana, and we are facing a superior fighting force. But that's not going to be good enough. So on 1813, March 3rd, 1813, we passed something in our country called the Torpedo Act. And what this does, and it's absolutely, it would be ridiculous today, let's just put it that way, is they decided that they were going to make it lawful for any person or persons to burn, sink, or destroy any British armed vessel of war, except vessels coming as cartels or flags of truce, and for the purpose to use torpedoes, submarine instruments, or other destructive machine warfare, whatever. And they're going to give you the bounty of 1/2 of the value of the armed vessel. They basically turned the entire United States population into mercenaries. That's what Madison did. So when we look at some of the battles that end up eventually occurring in this war with militia attacking civilian targets, it's no wonder in the end they burn Washington to the ground, because they can't discern who's an enemy and who's not. Because the whole country's at war. I mean, imagine if the Taliban or Al-Qaeda was given permission from the Pakistani government or the governments of Afghanistan and Iraq to get 1/2 of the value for every Humvee that they blew up. Yikes. Ho Chi Minh would never do that as a communist. All right. Where was I? So this is exactly what America did. Their civilians went to war against the British. In June 15th of 1813, off of New London, the Ramillies, the flagship of Thomas Masterman Hardy, was anchored off of New London, and a guy by the name of John Scudder, he was from New York, he loads up a small American schooner called the Eagle with provisions. It looked enticing. There were fruits and vegetables and all this stuff on the top of it, and they made it look like something that the British would want to capture. And sure enough, they did. But underneath the fruit and the vegetables was a trigger to explode all the gunpowder they had in the hull of this boat. And the plan was, they're going to bring it right upside the Ramillies and they're going to offload this stuff. Well, they started offloading it before they got to the boat. It blew up, it killed think it was 9 British sailors, injured a whole bunch more, and obviously the party is incredibly upset. He declares right then and there that anyone using these dastardly objects of war, these insidious methods, will be destroyed. And he gives an order to all of his ships that if you're going to enter a port, you are not to anchor. Because if you see this stuff coming, you got to get out of there, right? Flash forward to March of 1814. There were 2 more separate attacks similar to this off of the mouth of the Mystic River. One against the Endymion. It was a British frigate. The other was against a 74-gun ship of the line, or third-rate ship of the line, similar to the Ramillies, called the HMS La Hogue. And who led this attack was Jeremiah Holmes, the hero of the Battle of Stonington. He took these barrels full of gunpowder and kind of had them rigged to kind of float out towards the La Hogue in the middle of the night on a fuse. Well, it got hung up on the La Hogue's anchor chain, didn't make it to the side of the ship, and the whole thing goes up, right? And if you read the logs of the La Hogue, they tell you about how all the shipmates on the quarterdeck were just doused in water. Right? You just imagine this plume. But March of 1814 is not very far away from August of 1814, when Stonington is attacked. And considering how long snail mail takes back then to get to captains, to get to admirals, to get to people of importance, Stonington seems to be retribution for the attacks that have happened in New London and Mystic. Stonington's not that far away from Mystic, and Stonington has a nice point. You've all been down there, right? It's relatively deep water on the outside for big boats to come in, and it's a place to make a stand, to give a principled response to what occurred. And the British were also changing their strategy back then too. They had in command in North America, there were 2 stations of operation for the Navy. One was in Halifax, Nova Scotia. The other one was in Bermuda. In control of the Halifax, Nova Scotia command at the beginning of the war was an admiral by the name of John Burleigh Warren. Now, he replaced the admiral that was responsible for the Chesapeake Leopard affair. Historians will know that in 1807 really inflamed the idea of impressment in the United States. Well, he was canned. The British didn't want to go to war with America. They had zero interest in doing this. So they put this guy who was a nice talkative guy who was supposed to quell the emotions of America and get us to stop thinking about war, because they got Napoleon to fight. They want actually our money. They want our commerce. They want money to then throw at Austria to have them fight them for them. We are someone they're not ready to mess with at the moment. We're a mosquito. So Warren is replaced when it realized that, the war started. America's getting really feisty and are determined to fight us. And an important thing in history happens over in Europe. In October of 1813, Napoleon's defeated at the Battle of Leipzig, which is the largest battle in human history at this point in time before World War I. It's often known as the Battle of Nations. There was a coalition of 12 nations fighting against Napoleon. Anyway, he was defeated. It's not too long after where he gets deposed to the sent to Elba, north of Corsica, where he grew up. And they replace Warren with Alexander Cochrane. Alexander Cochrane hates the United States. He wants to make an example of the United States. His brother died, he was hit by a cannonball at Yorktown. So he has something to say about America, and he wants to make that known. And this is the guy now in charge of the fleets in North America. George Prevost, he's a general of the kind of Canadian British forces, and we have done we had an incident at Port Dover where we destroyed a bunch of windmills and were fighting a very uncivilized style of war. And he tells Alexander Cochrane, I need help. I need you to assist in inflicting that measure of retaliation which shall deter the enemy from repetition of similar outages. So Cochrane responds, that he gives his commanders and his captains the right to destroy and lay waste to towns and districts upon the coast you may find assailable. So go ahead and destroy anything that looks like it's done anything bad to you, like Stonington. This is a letter from Cochrane in reply to Henry Hotham. Henry Hotham is a rear admiral. He's under the command of Alexander Cochrane, but he is basically the boss of Thomas Masterman Hardy, who commands the squadron at Stonington. So Hardy gets orders from Hotham. Hotham gets orders from Cochrane. Well, this is a response, and believe it or not, we deciphered this. Acquainting me of your having directed an attack to be made upon the town of Stonington, enclosing to Sir Thomas Hardy's report on the result thereof, I very much approve of your having directed this measure, particularly as this town had been a receptacle of torpedoes, and frequent in all cases where you may find these insidious measures resorted to. You do your utmost to destroy and annoy the town encouraging them. So, I mean, he's basically saying, yeah, you were right to attack the town of Stonington. So here we are, August 9th of 1814. Thomas Masterman Hardy arrives with his fleet, and he gives a letter of truce to the residents of Stonington. Those of you that know this story know this line all too well. You know, not wishing to destroy the offending inhabitants residing in the town of Stonington, 1 hour is given them from the receipt of this to move out of the town. So he wants to burn everything but not have any resistance. And, you know, this is what we receive before we decide we're not going to accept that, and we are going to defend this town to the last extremity, I think, was what Amos Palmer said. Okay, so we get into the stuff that we were looking at. And one of the first things we decided to do was go over online, see if we can get some of these documents. If you get a chance on your way out, I don't know if you've been to the talk that Bob Reiger gave just a year and a half ago, it seems, since COVID's gotten really messed this whole thing up, as you all are aware. You'll see them blown up on the back wall there, some of these captain's logs, so feel free to try to decipher them yourself and take a look at them. This one, I thought I'd show you a page of a couple of them. So this is the Ramulese, the logs of the HMS Terror, the Dispatch, which unfortunately was not very long, which is discouraging because that's the boat that came really close and we destroyed it pretty handily. So what do we pull from this? Well, as I mentioned, the things, questions and answers I wanted to look at, one was where the ship's positions were. So can these logs tell us that? Now, they didn't have GPS back then. They're not going to, track it on their phone and tell you the exact coordinates, but they did line of sight navigation. So, if you look at this, for example, you're not going to be able to read this from that far away, but I created this document a while back trying to figure out where the ship positions were. So I color-coded them. The Ramulese is this dot way out here. This is on Tuesday the 9th. It's going to meet up with this squadron. So you can see here, this is the Pactolus log. Weighed and dropped anchors 2 miles of the town, northeast by north of the Dumpling Islands, and west by south, or northeast by north of the town, west by south of the Dumpling Islands, and east-southeast of Point Judith. So you take that, and then you compare it to one of the columns in the reports, gives you like the fathoms of how deep they were in certain areas, and you look at some old charts, you can kind of get a proximity of where some of these ships were. Is it completely foolproof and accurate? Absolutely not, especially since I did it. In our charts, to be perfectly honest, we had one, I think our earliest one to 1814 was 1839. And there have been several hurricanes in between there. There was a really bad storm in 1815 that occurred. So are the depths of these places accurate? I mean, 1839 is a lot better than something after the hurricane of 38, right? I mean, heck, Sandy Point was relocated to the state of Connecticut for crying out loud. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's we don't know to be totally true, but I mean, tried our best to try to figure out where these ships were. These logs also told us a little bit of what happened when they dropped a pinnacle or a cutter, some of these boats that may have happened during the launches, when they started fire or when they ceased fire. They also told us about some of the incidents that occurred, like when the Pactolus grounded. I kind of put it about right here, but when the Pactolus grounded on a shoal, they were really stuck. Their intention was to come in, this is on the morning of the 10th, to come in with the dispatch and attack the two cannons at the point. But they couldn't make it off there, so they tried desperately to get rid of it. They dropped 52 tons of fresh water, a whole bunch of shot, and their bower anchor, their front anchorage. Their anchor was broken. It had a broken fluke, so they dropped that, thinking they'll lighten their load. So it's possible we could get some of that ordnance, maybe. I don't know. Is that something we could look at? We could pinpoint our side scan sonars on and look at. We kind of got lucky with this, because in April of 2019, we contacted the University of Rhode Island, and the University of Rhode Island every year does like with their college, they do an educational side scan sonaring with their college students off of Block Island on a known wreck. So rather than them doing that during that year, they came to us and did their side scan sonar in Stonington for us. And it cut the cost significantly. I think we paid like $3,000, don't quote me, I'm not the accountant, but $3,000 I think for that, and we had to pay for the fuel and the crew, but we got some results without having to break the bank. And this is our side scan sonar images from that scan. We decided to scan the west side of the island, the west side of the point, excuse me, because this is where the dispatch, according to Hardy, was within pistol shot of the point. So we figure somewhere around here. So we did that, and then maybe we'll survey the front of the point as well. So I didn't know much about side scan sonar and how it worked when I went into the meeting with the committee to look at this stuff. And Brennan Phillips, who teaches the course, was giving us a little bit of a course on how this stuff works. So I thought I would share what little knowledge I know with you so you can kind of see what we were looking at. So this is just a small section of this side scan sonar. If you see, it kind of looks like painted lines. That's because the boat does something called mowing the lawn. They will go back and forth, and using their GPS get the coordinates of where they are and kind of paint the bottom. So this is one area, and if you see here, this isn't the continental shelf. This is a stitching of two pieces of the side scan sonar together. So you'll notice the boat passed in one direction and then passed in another direction because these shadowy images are in opposite sides. This indicates height or depth of something. So when you look at this black area, you say, well, this is probably a rock because it's really high up and there's a big shadow behind it. And when the side scan sonar, literally coming in from the side, hits it, it's absent of the side scan. Then there's color differentiation. The darker it is, with the exception of this, is softer ground, and the whiter in image apparently is harder material. Okay, that's great. So where's the cannonballs? So we're trying to figure out how to read this, and so we sat down with some the experts, and they're saying, well, there's some anomalies here. There's something here that kind of looks like a shipwreck. You might want to check it out. There's different pieces. There's a spot here, which unfortunately we're like, well, what happened to this? And like, well, the boat kind of veered off at a wake. I don't know. We didn't get that particular spot. But this all means nothing if we're looking for stuff without the magnetometer, because the magnetometer picks up ferrous material, picks up iron, metal. So when you're if you can put the two together, Anything that's like red or orange here indicates there's metal down there. Anything that's not, okay, well, it's probably not worth looking at. Certainly from the Battle of Stonington. So we thought this was a pretty good spot of interest. It had some small magnetic anomalies, small targets, maybe cannonballs. Well, that would be cool. We go down and find 30 of them. You know. What do you think these are? Any guesses?
Anchors.
Word balls.
They're lobster pots. Stonington is littered with them. I mean, you can't jump into this ocean without seeing one. I mean, they're everywhere, and they're magnetic anomalies, right? So, they're square. It was a nightmare trying to decipher all this stuff. So anyway, Charlie and I, we planned our first dive to go down and look at some of these targets. We said, all right, well, we're going to stop here, we're going to stop here, we're going to stop here, and see what's there. So we got the coordinates. We loaded up on Tom Mitchell's very nice catamaran, and we went diving. So Charlie had his underwater metal detector. I had my camera and my knife, I think, at this point, and poking around trying to find stuff. We found our own anchor. That was good. And really, honestly, I mean, we didn't find anything. We found lobster pots. We found an insanely large anchor. It was a mushroom anchor. I think that thing was the size of a motorcycle. I mean, gosh, no wonder somebody left it there. I swear it must have 500 pounds. It was huge. And that was it. Oh, I found this guy. So maybe that's my treasure. I brought it with me, my little pin. You know, if you type in that number online, they'll send it to you in the mail. So my pewter pin, I guess, is the treasure from this dive. All right, so flash forward in even more time. We're heading towards October at this point of 2019, and we are going to have a meeting now with David Robinson, who is going to do a more thorough, more professional marine archaeological survey, but we got to figure out now where to put it, right? We had this one here, but where else should we have it? Should we put it on the west side of the island? I keep calling it island. West side of the point? There was what several sources say was a landing, both attempted landing on both the 9th and the morning of the 10th. So maybe we could find something there. Certainly, there might be some cannonballs or some other things located on this side. Do we go after the Pactolus anchor? Because, as I mentioned, the Pactolus dropped that big anchor without a fluke when they got stuck. So we could decide to go after that. So we had this meeting. David Robinson put this together. I guess you would call mine more, or it was less precise but more accurate. I think that's the scientific term here. I just put dots on a map. He thought, well, maybe the boat could have been in this area based off of the maps that he had. He did a much more professional job than I did. And he thought the grounding of the Pactolus could have been on Noyes' Shoal out here. So, okay. So I spent I put up a good persuasive argument, we'll say, to go after the anchor. Because I said to myself, you know, is side scan sonar and magnetometer really going to pierce down deep enough into the sand to be able to give us a reading of a cannonball or grape shot or anything like that? I thought the chances of it were minimal. You know, and then they're like, well, if you're going after one anchor, that's kind of a needle in a haystack. You know, we're going to spend $30,000 on trying to do this. We got to go somewhere where we're going to probably maybe get some anomalies to go and check out. So why put it out in the middle of nowhere? Of course, they also dropped, you know, a whole bunch of ordnance as well to lighten the boat. They dropped a bunch of cannonballs out there just in a pile. And then, of course, the 52 gallons of fresh water. I think Charlie found some of that in his boot. So what do we do? Well, the consensus was we are going to have our second search here in the west side of the island. We're not going to go out on the shoal, you know, way offshore, or at least kind of out of the range of the the cannons of Stonington. He put, David Robinson put this nice little image together of the range of an 18-pound smoothbore cannon and how far it could go out. So it's about 1.4 miles or so, according to historical records, and the range of a musket on the high end, 220 yards. So, is it worth searching for something beyond the range of our American cannons for one anchor? No, it's not. So we decided we were going to go on the west side of the island. But of course, topography has changed since 1814, as we discussed. Areas off of Dodge Paddock at one point were marshland, mud. Now they're subtidal. Thank you, probably Hurricane 38. And the depths are all different. So, I don't know, maybe the magnetometer will pick up something. Okay. Oh, this is the edge I want to show you. This is the Pactolus, and this is what her bower anchor looked like on the ship. It was pretty big, but again, it was at a broken fluke, so they dropped it overboard. Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. So while Dave is doing this, he's setting up this October scan. Of course, we're still doing research. We're trying to figure out new and exciting things about the battle. Is there anything else to look at, find? Well, one day, Bob Ryder and I are in the Woolworth Library just combing through some old files. We decided we were going to start at A and see how far we got through the files to see if we came up with anything from anyone's records of Battle of Stonington that somebody missed. Well, we found this, I think we got to G. We didn't make it very far. But anyway, we found this account, this Captain Thomas Davison account, written in a Morning Telegraph paper written in 1892. He was there at the battle. Captain Davison was, he was born in 1801. And being 92 years old when he's interviewed, they made great detail in this first paragraph to explain that he had all of his faculties. He wasn't some senile person who's telling tales. And he goes into his account of the battle. And some of the stuff in here was eye-opening, absolutely. It was fascinating because it corroborated some stuff while also conflicted with some other pieces of information. For example, here he's talking about how the gun was moved from the breastwork on the morning of the 10th to go on the east side of the island. One of the 18-pounders, it was loaded with double grape shot and pointed at the boats. Again, I told you, Amos Palmer explained these boats were just, blown to smithereens and people were cartwheeling and tons of people were killed. Well, he said the accuracy was well aimed. It poured its deadly contents on the boats. It did them considerable damage and wounded some of the men. So, do we take the word of a guy trying to get his troops paid, or a 14-year-old who's now 92 years old, and really, why would he not tell the truth of what happened? And then there's this one that I found really neat. After the battle, he says, the Pactolus, the cable was cut, but they left a red flagged buoy to mark where they dropped all the ordnance so they could go back and get it. Well, he and his buddies swim out to this spot, they grab the flag, and they go put it on their mom's house. I mean, I can picture little Tommy Davidson and Tertius climbing all the way up there and putting it on the top. And, it's fascinating, and we're like smiling ear to ear because we're finding all this neat stuff. And that's when the roller coaster hit its bottom, because we get down to the bottom part here. And he said, Captain Davidson secured it on the roof as a trophy until the flag was later whipped out by the winds. Later, the anchor was secured by 14 men that constituted the garrison of the fort, who rowed the same and divided the proceeds. So they took the anchor we were looking for, they cut it up into pieces and sold it for beer money. Let's just put it this way, thank goodness they didn't listen to me and go after the anchor, because that would have been a lot of money not spent well. But at least we know what happened, which is nice. Okay, so we decided this is the new side scan sonar. I'm just from October of 2019, and we got much more professional feedback on where the anomalies may be. So you can see he marked all of these particular spots. This is off of Dodge Paddock, off of the Avalonian Land Preserve, and then all these other possible anomalies of things. Charlie and I dived this. We kind of went this way and found a whole string of lobster pots. So of course, a bunch of that metal is lobster pots. Because there was a lot of fire at the fort, and they were trying to land over here, there was a pottery wharf back. But at the time of the battle, the pottery factory had a dock out here. It was built in 1811, and it succumbed to a fire in like the 1830s. But there was a spot here for possible British troops to land. So the 18-pounder up here was turned at the point so it could fire back in this direction at the oncoming boats. And then you had defenders here that were shooting and then getting shot back at. So is there anything to find? So Dodge Paddock, and this is the Avalonia Land Preserve, and we were given permission to have our terrestrial archaeology done. This is where we concentrated our search at this point in time. So here is Kevin McBride and his team searching the fields of the Avalonia Land Preserve, the rocks, and just below the kind of the tide line where they could with metal detectors. Here's me getting into the water. We're going to search out with Charlie a little further out, metal detecting. And here's a picture of the bottom. Well, not really, but this is what we encountered. I swear this eelgrass was about this high. There were small pockets of sand. But I mean, I had a handheld metal detector. I feel bad for Charlie because he had this big thing that he's trying to sweep through this grass. It's getting entangled in everything. You feel just icky being in it because you don't know where you are. And did we find anything? Well, having to come up to the surface to orient yourself, go back down, come up, go back down. We found some metallic hits. And Charlie found a ring, right? You found a very crappy, rusty ring.
I thought it was a diamond ring, but it was a little Walgreens.
I found a copper nail that was used in boats around this time, so that was kind of neat. I also found this brick. I grabbed it because I recognized the nail. Don't ask me why I, at one point, was looking at worthwhile bricks, but it struck me, so I took it. It's actually from Berlin, Connecticut in 1920. And it's worth about $15. So that was my find. Kevin McBride had much more luck. They found 25 battle-related or potentially battle-related artifacts in Dodge Paddock, in the shallows, where they could see where they were, as well as in the Avalonia Land Preserve there. This is a 4-pounder cannonball that was found. It was actually, they were going door to door and asking anyone if they had any records or anything that could add more to the battle. And one person on School Street who was doing renovation found a 4-pound cannonball in their backyard and brought it to our attention. And this may not seem all that important, but really it was, because there were 3 cannons on the American side. An 18-pounder, an 18-pounder, and a 6 or 4-pounder cannon. And one source says 6, one source says 4. Tertius said he probably thinks it was a 4, and it was. There were no British ships shooting 4-pound cannonballs. So it would lead you to believe that our cannon was a 4-pound cannonball, just a little bit more evidence that kind of corroborates that story. We found in the waters of Dodge Paddock grape shot. Grape shot was either fired from a carronade on a barge or one of the boats on the dispatch. They had 16, 20, 32-pound carronades, and they fired a variety of different things. One of the things they fired was grape shot. If you think of a shotgun shell cartridge, this is a much larger version of it, and when put into like a wrapping like this, it kind of creates a bit of a choke, and it can shoot out into a confined spread. Anti-personnel, not very pretty, but we found one of those. Canister shot. If you're thinking shotgun shell again, and you think of like bird shot, except on a much bigger scale, you had these, which was about a centimeter or so in size. We found some intact, would lead you to believe they were American, which is interesting because Kevin wrote in his report that we don't have very many canisters shot from the War of 1812, so that was something that was new. And then we found some, a piece or two that were dented, meaning they were fired from British vessels approaching, unless we had really bad aim, which I don't think that was the case. We also found musket balls. So these were all either intact musket balls or musket balls that were dented on impact. And this would lead you to believe, where he found them, that there was a line of troops on the Avalonia Land Preserve Dodge Paddock area in a confined space, so like a line, a literal line of troops who were firing upon the British and got fired at. So it leads credence to believe that we repelled from the west side of Stonington Point with not only our 18-pounder at the point, but also a collection of troops with muskets. This is, and he puts possible, I don't think we'll ever know for sure, a fragment of a Congreve rocket. There's one located on the back table back there if you want to take a look at them. They range from about that big to huge, and they were meant to fire off of the barges or a few of the ships, it's like a giant bottle rocket, really, and it would explode with and mean to cause fire. They were pretty much useless in the War of 1812. It appeared more of a scare tactic. If you read some of these accounts, I think Hotham was explaining to Alexander Cochrane how useless these things are. They never should be used, and they did absolutely nothing at Stonington. Largely, the rockets that were fired, and then what were known as carcasses. These were incendiary cannonballs. If you ever go to the Stonington Library and you see those pillars, those actually aren't cannonballs. They are carcasses. They have holes in the sides of them in which it's filled with a bunch of incendiary material. I think like tallow and corn grain gunpowder, things that can send a flame out of them almost 10 feet in order to burn anything around them. They can burn it hot for like a half an hour. So our troops, we spent more time thinking the Battle of Stonington putting fires out than we really did fighting anyone. I think to the credit of those people who became a brigade of firemen, we didn't have as much damage at the Battle of Stonington as we could have. And then he says some early 19th century buttons, buckles found in Dodge Paddock. Are they possibly related to the battle? Could they have been dropped by a soldier? Maybe. But it doesn't have anybody's name on it, so who knows, right? It's been 207 years, it could be anybody's. But found in the same area. So that's the stuff that we found. Next, this is where I get kind of away from the archaeological reports and more into my own optimism as an amateur archaeologist and a historian, because there's got to be something out there, right? Something we can find that's going to bring fame and glory. That big treasure chest full of gold. What are we going to? What am I going to find? What am I going to get out of this? So a little bit of what I'm about to tell you is my own optimism, but I wouldn't be here telling you it if I didn't think it was true. So I tried my best to convince people on the committee, and a bit of rolling their eyes, but I think partly is because of where it was located, because it wasn't within our field of study. It was where the boat was turning around, but still had their side scan sonar on. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Beth Moore found this article and sent it to Bob and Chelsea and I from the historical footnotes of the Stonington Historical Society dated 1973. It was written by a professor, George Murdoch, or Richard, excuse me, Murdoch, from the University of Georgia, who was interested in the Battle of Stonington for some strange reason, because he was actually a professor of Latin American studies. I'm not sure why he was interested in the Battle of Stonington, but nevertheless, he writes this account of the Battle of Stonington, and in the footnotes, he gives a document that I have been searching for months. The letters from James Galloway, who was the captain of the dispatch to Hardy, telling him what happened at the battle. So I was very much interested in looking at that footnote. I'm like, man, how do I get hold of this guy, right? So I call up the University of Georgia. Actually, I did an internet search. Found out he had passed away. I can't talk to him. So I'm like, well, let's just, shoot blindly and we'll see what we get. I called up the University of Georgia and I said, by chance, do you have any of this guy's files? It cost me $6. I got a crate about this big of files that they took PDF phone scans with and sent it to me. The files from, I'm calling them the Murdoch files. One of the files, the correspondence from Galloway, says a couple of interesting things. He tells us, the dispatch, soldiers were really disappointed when they were ordered to stop ceasing fire. When we still saw the enemy's flag flying, we were upset, but they were brave soldiers. Our rigging, sails, and yards were considerably cut up. 2 guns disabled with many shot in our hull, 1 in the waterline. The enemy had but 2 guns with good breastwork. Blah, blah. 1 at the waterline, 2 guns disabled. Okay. Later in his logs, in the dispatch logs, they talk about where they were and what they did. Well, in August 18th, 1814, they arrived at Halifax for repairs. The ship is shot. It is not serviceable. So they got to go up there to get the ship fixed. In the meantime, they offload their wounded, some of the names of the men who were wounded. They sent 3 guns to the wharf to get repaired. They discharged some other Marines to the hospital. And then they recovered 5 guns from the gunboat wharf. So if they sent 3 to get repaired and 5 returned, what happened to the other 2? Well, 2 were disabled. What does disabled mean in 1814? Does that mean they don't work, or does that mean they really don't work? And if he's got shot up in the waterline, does that mean that they dumped them because they have to stay above water? They didn't say that. I don't know. But I was looking at this side scan image and I came across this little flip. And I looked at it and I said, boy, that looks like a 32-pound carronade. And I looked at a 32-pound carronade and the trundles in the front and the trundles in the front. And I'm like, this is what keeps me up at night. I want that. And Charlie humored me, and we went down there. We went looking for it. We hit something magnetic down there. It was about the length of a cannon. Magnetic anomalies. There's a couple more stupid lobster pots there, but we don't have any. If I go back, really go back to these images. All of this has magnetometer information to go with it. These turnaround points where I found it don't have any of that. And the professional archaeologists aren't going to confirm anything that's not in the professional scan area. So, I don't know. This is just maybe me being optimistic. Who knows? But the story continues, and I'm going to keep diving. And with any luck, you may see in the paper that I found a can. Or someone else beats me to it because they watched this on Facebook. Okay. A couple of other notable or interesting pieces of information that I found and I thought was worth noting. if you know the history of the Battle of Stonington, on like the second to last day before the final barrage of fire from the Ramulese and the Pactolus, Hardy sends another letter to a letter of truce in a boat to the town, saying, "All right, fine. We believe you don't have any torpedoes, but we want that. We want our British. She was a spy, a British spy, Mrs. Stewart. They want her back from New London. So if you can produce her by morning, we won't continue to fire at your town." Well, he sent a note back saying we have no authority to do that. We would have to get orders from the president, really, to have that exchange. So Hardy, the next morning fires upon the town. He doesn't really hit anything. Right? If you know the story, well, they say, well, there's a church steeple that he thought he would produce the most damage if he fired out a church, because a church is located near the center of town. If you've ever been on a boat out there, and you can imagine what it looked like with maybe 20% of the buildings, you could probably see everything. I mean, let's be honest. So, did he really just have that bad of aim? Or did he deliberately do it? Or was he looking for that church steeples? Who knows? But this account, I found, for whatever reason, I was browsing around and I found that the New York Public Library, when I keyword searched for Pactolus, had a journal from an anonymous sailor on board the Pactolus. Well, that's new. And I email corresponded with a few people. They sent me a digital copy of the file. Here's what it looked like. I deciphered it, and at the end, it talks about that exchange. And he says, Friday the 12th, light breezes, 5 o'clock, open fire over the town, as did the Ramulese terror, and kept up constant fire until 9 o'clock p.m. Ditto weather, attack, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, this line, this word, over the town. What does that mean? Did he literally fire over the town? Like on purpose? Or is that 18th century speak for he just fired upon the town? We don't know, but I mean, it's interesting that this word was used because maybe it means that Hardy did it on purpose. Maybe he was just done, wanted to get his display in and then leave. Not sure. Lastly, this is just interesting. I found out that an admiral, Sir Horatio Thomas Austin, entered the Navy early in his life, and he was a midshipman on board the Ramulese in 1814. So this guy who was a small sailor, but then he worked his way up into the British Navy, and he ended up taking part in Captain Perry's second Arctic expedition on board the Fury in 2021. So this guy, this is like 6 degrees of separation. This guy was in the Arctic at the exact same time Nate Palmer was in the Antarctic. Kind of cool. And then lastly, I hate to end kind of on a depressing note, but this was some other information I was really trying hard to find. I wanted to know who was killed in this battle. Amos Palmer describes, the dispatch, they had 21 killed and 50 wounded. That's what he writes. Well, where do you get these numbers from? You go and count? I mean, the British aren't going to divulge that information. He was guessing, So we look at the captain's reports, the after battle letters. We find that 12 men were wounded and 2 were killed on board the dispatch. So who were they? I, again, was trying to figure this out, going source to source, until I came across those Murdoch files I was mentioning from the guy who did this. And this was in James Galloway, the captain of the dispatch's report. And he gives the list of people who were wounded and killed. We killed Thomas Broadwater, an able-bodied sailor, and we killed William Dewar. He was their cabin boy. So, that's a little bit of a downer. I mean, that's what war is, right? You know, we can glorify this stuff all we want. We can talk about the pomp and circumstance surrounding the glory of this battle and how, armed with only a banana, we went and conquered this massive fleet. But in the end, you know, war is war, right? We killed a cabinet boy. All right. And lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't do a selfless pitch for my book. I was fortunate enough to write the James Madison chapter in a book by Ian Dale called The Presidents. It comes out on November 11th, just kind of in time for anniversary of presidential elections. And Ian Dale wrote a book called The Prime Ministers. There was the 55 British prime ministers, and you know, notable historians and politicians wrote each individual chapter. Well, it made it to the 13th on London's bestseller list, and it was the political book of the year, essentially. So I'm hoping The Presidents does just as well. So I wrote one chapter in it, and if you're interested, you can scan my Q-square. That's all I got for you guys. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take the time to answer them. I don't know what time it is. 7:09. Yes?
Which of the two that were killed is buried here?
Neither one of them.
Is there a British soldier that's buried?
Yeah, his name was Thomas Powers. He was a midshipman on board the HMS Superb that came the year prior. They were, of course, you know, harassing American merchantmen. The Superb was a big third-rate ship of the line, and they sent a cutter or a boat out to this boat, and they mistaked, I believe the story accounts, he mistaked the doffing of his hat for him having a pistol, and they shot him. So there was a big, you know, to-do about that because we didn't want to offend them. Obviously, we didn't want an incident like the Battle of Stonington occurring. So, you know, we treated them with respect. We buried them. There was some communication from the Captain Pageant, I believe, of the Superb, telling us, you know, it was very honorable that we did that. And but no, that wasn't from the battle. So, yes.
In the end, when what's the name, Hardy reported to Cochran and the guys, he said, we fired a couple of broadsides, we really taught them a lesson, kind of thing, right?
It's funny how the British accounts are very pro-British and the American accounts are very pro-American, right? Because they don't want to report back to their superiors that, well, 2 18-pound cannons on the point repelled half of the North American fleet. It wouldn't fare too well. I mean, Hardy is the hero, one of the heroes of the Battle of Trafalgar, right? But yeah, I'm sure it didn't sit too well. That Stonington was that bad, yeah.
How many ships were off the point?
How many like big ships?
Yeah.
Or so they launched the little ships. They launched, according to the record, 6. Big ships. You had the HMS Ramillies. That was the big 40. The big 74-gun third-rate ship of the line. You had the Pactolus, that was a 5th-rate ship of the line frigate, had 38 guns on it. You had the Dispatch, which was a sloop of 16 to 18 guns. And you had the Terror. Terror, right? The Terror was the bomb ship. I love the class. It was the Vesuvius class, right? Bomb ship, right? And they were firing mortars into the town of those carcasses. You had the Nimrod, which showed up late to the battle and did absolutely nothing. And if you read the logs, it pretty much tells you that. It did absolutely nothing, turned around. We did find one 6th ship called the Sylph. There was a British supply transport vessel that would ferry supplies. That was way offshore. And that actually sunk in a hurricane with all sailors lost. So we don't have any of those records of their ship's logs or anything like that.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes?
You said the presentation's online?
This presentation will be on Facebook, well, it's recorded on Facebook Live now, but they're going to transfer it to Stonington Historical Society, and if you're a member, you have free access to it in a couple of days, I'm sure. Anything else? Okay, guys, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
If anyone wants a Merwin brick, it will be going on sale on eBay.